Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you, and today I have the cold steel Talwar. Now this is a knife, I've got to say, that has been really surprising in a number of different ways, and I want to kind of share that with you to get us started with this video. First off, I've got to say I've been aware of this knife for a long time, and I've kind of always thought it was a cool looking knife, but probably not that practical, and because of that I hadn't really pulled the trigger on one. When I picked up this knife, I got this knife in a trade. This is the Triad Knives Valkyrie. It kind of sold me on the Persian blade shape. All of a sudden I realized there's a lot of utility to that shape in addition to, you know, that sort of scary looking upswept tip knife that can be a little aggressive looking. But it turns out they're actually really utilitarian. And so that kind of got me thinking about picking up one of these. And then when I saw the blue limited run, I was like, that looks so awesome. I definitely need to go ahead and pull the trigger on that. So that's one of the things that's really been surprising to me is just how utilitarian this blade shape actually is. It's an extremely useful blade. Not only that, but the other thing is it's much more ergonomic and it's a lot smaller than it looks on camera. All the times I've ever seen videos about this, even those guys who talk about the size, it doesn't really register. You know, it feels like on screen, and probably looks that way to you too, just because it seems to be that this knife just looks on screen larger than it really is. And so that's the other thing that I want to share by way of introduction is, you know, just keep in mind as we go through this review and as we switch over to the top-down view that this knife is actually a lot smaller in hand than it looks when you see it on video. And I'm not sure why it looks large, but it really does. Let's start off with size and weight the way we normally do, and then we'll switch over to the close-up view for you. This knife is 9 3/16 overall, so a little under 9 1/4 inches. I think a lot of websites listed at 9 1/4 inches. The blade is 3 13/16, so a lot of places say 4-inch blade, and it's actually it's more than an eighth of an inch less than that. The handle, if I close it down here, as you put this in your pocket, this length is about 5.5 inches, and it is fairly thick, you know, especially because of the aggressive sort of pistol grips here. It is fairly thick in pocket, certainly, you know, similar to a lot of Spydercos that tend to be quite thick, or to, let's say, a Recon 1. Those are all fairly substantial in pocket, about 1/2 inch thick here on the handle scale, and only 4.75 ounces, so under 5 ounces for a knife that is over 9 inches long. So really, really good sort of size to weight ratio there. Overall, this is a much more compact, much more comfortable knife than I was initially expecting. Okay, let's go ahead and get a closer look at this from the top-down view. We'll switch over to that now, and I'll talk to you in a second. Okay, so here we are with a little closer view of this cold steel Talwar. We'll start off looking at the blade the way that we normally do. So this is sort of a Persian upswept blade. You know, the Talwar is the traditional Persian name for this shape. However, I want you to notice that there's actually not that much upsweep. This is almost actually a standard blade shape. So if you think of something like the Finwolf or other knives like that where the back spine here is just straight, there is a very slight curve here, but it's extremely slight. So this almost could call this a standard blade shape, but really I guess we'll call it an upswept blade shape. Tons of belly here, okay, but not so much belly that you get no straight edge, all right? And notice that this knife has the typical cold steel problem, only exaggerated. I'll bring this up close for you. See there how there's quite a bit, almost 1/4 inch, not sharpened. All right. However, it hasn't really bothered me, and one of the reasons is the way that I tend to use this blade. I found this to be an extremely utilitarian blade. Number one, because of the ergonomics of the knife, the handle angle sort of naturally, you know, if you imagine this was a flat surface, this is how you end up sort of naturally wanting to use the knife, which gives you a lot of, you know, ability to cut and rock. Then the thumb disc here actually serves as a really great resting spot for your thumb, so you can actually get a good perch there and really push down I know that those are more ergonomic features, but they do affect how the blade is kind of used. Top swedge here cut out but not finished all the way to the end, and that is to save a little more material and add some strength to the end of that knife. And this satin finish, I've got to tell you, is, look at how much reflection you're getting there. It is almost a mere polish. Really, really attractive satin finish. I love the way that they have done this knife. I don't really, you know, I'll bring in the Para 2 for a second to show you. So there's what, you know, sort of a typical satin finish. So you can see those grind lines, they're pretty obvious there. This is much more finely polished. Okay, so really, really nice looking finish on that blade. And it is a full flat ground blade. I forgot to mention that earlier, but it does slice extremely well. Nice thin edge geometry here. Really, really great slicer, this knife. That's the blade. I'm actually much more impressed with this blade than I thought. It is CTS. I'll move that Spyderco out of the way. It is CTS XHP. Great performance on that. Now, I've said this before, but just in case you haven't seen a lot of my cold steel videos, the CTS XHP or the cold steel hardening on this steel tends to be a little soft. If I compare this to, say, some of my other blades that have the same steel, the cold steel seems just a teeny bit softer, which makes it easier to sharpen and does sacrifice a little in terms of edge retention, but certainly not the end of the world. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to lockup and deployment. Okay, this is of course a Triad Lock. Notice that it's pretty thick back lock here. Very thick blade stock. Let me grab, here's the Recon 1 that you can put right beside it. And you can see that the steel here in the Talwar is actually thicker than the steel in that Recon 1. So if you're familiar with the Recon 1, that should give you a sense for the fact that you've got a pretty robust blade here, blade stock here in the Talwar. All right, both of them of course do have that Triad Lock. Extremely strong lock. Now again, we've made this point before, the strength of a lock is not like the end of the world. However, it's worth considering, and that is a selling feature of cold steel knives, that you're really not going to get a stronger lock out there unless you're buying like a custom Andrew Demko that has a Triad Lock. You will see that's a fingerprint magnet. I apologize for that, but I'm not going to stop and wipe down the blade now. We'll just kind of go with it. That's going to be probably what your knife looks like a lot of the time. Anyway, so very, very firm lock. Does actuate a little nicer than, say, if you remember when we did the Pro Light review not that long ago. The Pro Light being a little cheaper, the finish, it's not quite as fine. This knife has become very, very smooth with a bit of use, and I can flick it open now, although there's no way I'm going to pull it off on camera, so I'm not even going to try. But just know that over a few weeks of use, this has broken in really nicely. The other thing that I want to say before we get away from lockup and deployment is this is a knife that is waveable out of pocket. And this really catches, because of the jimping on the side of this thumb disc, it really catches material, and you may have the opposite sort of problem where you're trying to get this knife out without waving it open, and it's actually hard to do that. You really have to pay attention. When you take this knife out of pocket, you can accidentally end up opening it because that thumb disc is really, really well jimped, and so it really catches on material, and you'll pull your knife out sometimes and end up with this kind of a situation where it's partially open. Okay, so that's lockup and deployment. Overall, very good, with that one minor issue where if you're not paying some attention to what you're doing, you can end up opening that blade when you don't really mean to. Let's move on now to the handle, which is really one of the wins on this knife. It's the thicker handle that cold steel does. Let me pull in the Broken Skull for a second here. Notice if I put these side by side, so the Broken Skull is quite thin, right? This is not the same way. This is the full width handle that you're probably used to seeing from cold steel. if you have some of the older models. Here it is beside the Recon 1. These two knives, by the way, are so close to the same size that I will do a full comparison of these two. But if you're familiar with the Recon 1, then you know about what size and grip the handle is on the Talwar. Okay, so very, very nice pistol grip here. I'll try to show you how it kind of cups into your hand. Really, really comfortable knife. And so you really got a positive grip on this. Does make it extremely useful as sort of a defensive blade. But, you know, most of us don't carry our knives for that purpose. And although this one may be especially suited to that role, this knife is also extremely utilitarian for the same reason. That handle with that pistol grip naturally puts the blade down toward any kind of cutting surface. So if you're cutting like on a cutting board, you naturally kind of hold the knife in this grip, which means all of your cutting work, I'm going to pretend like my fingers are carrots or something. If you're cutting this, the blade is kind of naturally out in front of your fingers and works really, really well for all those kind of utility tasks. And that's one of the things that's really surprised me about this knife. If you were doing a bunch of kitchen work or you're at a campsite and you're going to use this for food prep, the Talwar is actually more suited to that than the Recon 1, which may sound surprising to some of you as this is a more standard blade shape, but it's actually, the Talwar is really, really comfortable for all those kinds of utility cutting tasks that come along, which is a bit of a surprise, you know, considering the design seems to be very, very sort of tactical or combat driven. Flip it over to the other side there for you so we can talk about the clip. It is a typical cold steel clip, very, very tight, reversible to tip up left side or right side. Small lanyard hole there. I did just gently spring this clip to make it a little easier in and out of pocket. It's still really, really tight, but a little more comfortable at this point. Let's pull in some comparisons now before we wrap up the video. These are knives that maybe you would be interested in or would be good competition for this. Obviously, the Recon 1 belongs on this list. Another knife that I'm going to put in here that I find similar, or that I find, you know, has a similar role and construction and stuff, is the Manix 2 XL. A great knife. Now, knives like, I'll throw in a couple more here that, you know, I feel like this knife is in the same category as them. Here is the ZT-0560 and the Benchmade Crooked River. Fairly wide price range. These two are obviously more expensive, this one being much more, this one being a bit more. All of these knives, though, I think if you like this style of knife, if these are interesting to you and compelling, you'll probably like the Talwar. And I would actually argue that it's a little more comfortable. The ergos on the Talwar are actually a little better than a lot of these other options that I have shown you. And you certainly are not compromising anything in terms of quality or utility or any of that stuff, you know. So it's a really, really good offering, much better than I had actually initially thought maybe it would be. So overall, guys, this is a really, really good knife. It's extremely well built. The blade shape is very, very functional. The blade steel is excellent. The handle shape, which is very different, right? You don't see a lot of knives like this. Turns out to be much more comfortable, much more practical than maybe we would have anticipated. And of course, with these blue limited runs, they're very budget friendly right now. I think they're like around $100, maybe even less than that. I think I paid less than $100 for this one. So overall, guys, I've got to say this is just a really, really good knife. Highly recommended. Now, I don't know how it's going to play out as I do a full comparison with this and a few other cold steels that you may be looking at, but I promise to do that in the not too distant future, and we'll see kind of how it plays. Now, I will say this, this knife will hold its own against any of the other knives that I've shown you here over the last couple of minutes. There you go, guys. Thanks a lot for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. We'll talk to you soon.